Welcome to another episode of MindShareTV, number 114, incidentally. And today we have the honor of and privilege of speaking with two remarkable education leaders, Dr. Susan Enfield and Dr. Kristi Wilson, authors of the book On Fire, Under Fire, or Fired, Superintendents in the Pandemic. This book offers a deeply insightful look into the challenges superintendents face during COVID-19, the transformative leadership required, and the lessons we can take forward. Dr. Enfield and Dr. Wilson, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Thanks, Robert. Happy to be here.
Well,
Thank you, Robert.
It was so great to connect with the both of you in Palm Springs at the Education and Research and Development Institute recently. Fascinating community. You've got decades of experience as past superintendents, and you bring so much to the table. And it's about community, and it's about sharing, and hence MindShare Learning and what we do here at the MindShare Learning Report. Talk to me about the inspiration on the book, and why do you feel it's an important conversation for educators and leaders today?
Okay. Kristi, you want me to start?
Okay. Sure.
So first of all, Robert, thanks again. It's nice to see you. Always happy to be with our Canadian friends and colleagues. Kristi and I, as you referenced, both served as superintendents for over a decade, and we led through the pandemic. And we felt very strongly that the work that superintendents did, and sadly the price that some of them paid for the work they did during the pandemic, was an important story that just hadn't really been told, and it needed to be told in the voices of superintendents. So we wanted to capture the experiences, the dedication, the talent of these exceptional leaders, and really sort of frame it within this particular point in history, and a significant one at that. And we also wanted to make sure that it came out now, because we are fast approaching, hard to believe, the 5-year mark from when we closed schools.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Dr. Wilson?
Yeah, I think Susan hit all the points really well. Memorializing the historical aspects of what superintendents did to lead their communities, hold their communities together, provide the context so that the lessons are not repeated. We learn those lessons, in particular, as we are, tremendously under stress, different context, but stressful situations now. We can take those lessons and apply in real life settings now.
Thank you for that. So, leadership under pressure. The title itself suggests the immense pressure on superintendents during the pandemic. What were some of the biggest leadership challenges you or your peers faced?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many. What we learned, and first, I'd like to just say again, too, thanks so much, Robert, for the opportunity to be here. What we did in the book is highlight the opportunities, the challenges, the struggles, all of the insights of over 40 superintendents. So we took a look at from coast to coast throughout the United States, whether you were leading in a large district, a small district, rural, suburban. And, the pressures, I think one of the biggest things that I reflected back on is the guidance was changing. No matter, every day, it didn't matter if you were getting your guidance from the government or your local, it didn't matter where the guidance was coming from. You could count on that it was going to change. So that pressure to, act quickly, but also we were talking yesterday with someone, and I think it was Baron Davis, correct me if I'm wrong, Susan, but Baron from Richmond.
I know Baron well.
Mm-hmm. He coined this phrase, responsible transparency, in terms of knowing what to communicate, when to communicate it, but also the pressure of just responsibly communicating it quickly. So there was this pressure to respond quickly, respond appropriately, and at the same time, there wasn't a playbook for making these decisions that could impact so many lives. So that's one thing, and there's many others to draw from. Susan, jump in here.
Yeah, so I think that when you ask what were some of the biggest challenges, what comes to mind is in the very early days when there were so many unknowns, but when it became clear that we were going to have to close schools for a period of time, the degree to which we had to put so many things in motion, from getting food to our students and families, to deploying devices and ensuring home internet, to helping our teachers and staff, sort of make the transition to delivering instruction online. I mean, these were massive efforts that nobody was fully prepared for. And I think just the time and energy that took, in addition to what we were all experiencing, which was just this, completely, new and unknown reality that we were all facing, but realizing that in spite of the unknowns, we had a responsibility, we had a job to do as public school superintendents, and that job was to care for the children and young people, and more broadly, our communities.
Thank you for that. And I presume that's where your PLN national connections and relationships would really have presumably kicked in and leveraged the insights and problem solving challenges that you all face.
Yeah, absolutely. I think networking, there was no one size fits all type of networking, whether it was formal networks or informal networks, is so vitally important. And we feel pretty strongly that those networks are just as important now as they were during COVID in terms of your own professional learning. But, being able to, as Susan said, recently, you don't have to go it alone. But this
Right.
idea that, we're not in it alone, and there are, thousands of professional organizations, but also friendly folks out there who've walked this trail. Now, with the pandemic, like I said earlier, there was no playbook. We had never done this before,
Right.
but certainly people you could call on and, at least have a conversation about how do I begin to learn some of these things and handle the stress, or some of the mitigating factors. So certainly the power of networking and collaborating, and I would say having the ability to lean in on diverse perspectives was really helpful during COVID.
So you could almost, I was going to add that you can almost refer to this as a playbook in a crisis. Would you consider renaming it today?
I don't. Well, first of all, no. I think we think it's a
We
pretty
love
catchy
the
title,
Yeah.
and we also think that it really encapsulates not just superintendents during the pandemic, but frankly, superintendents today. And while I don't know that I would characterize it, Robert, as a playbook, there's certainly some lessons learned that are applicable to challenges facing leaders today. But really what this was about was capturing the experiences and the challenges in the voices of the superintendents themselves.
During COVID.
Well said.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So decision making in crisis responses, superintendents have to make rapid, high stakes decisions, as you've experienced. Can you share an example where a critical decision had a long lasting impact on the school district?
Well, let me just tell you this, and Mary Elizabeth Davis talked about this, and it's highlighted in the book about, and it's not necessarily an experience per se, but she said that, one of her biggest learnings was that it was interesting how she put this. She said that before COVID, having the ability to have a district team to lean in on to help her, through crisis management, because to your point, districts, we're not immune to crisis. For example, school shootings, unfortunately, fires, things that happen, crisis. We know how to handle those. So having the ability to lean in on a district team to help you go through crisis was what she coined a phrase, a nice to have. However, what she said was, once she went through COVID, what her aha was, having a district team to go through COVID and manage COVID and the pandemic was an essential have to have. And here's what her takeaway was. She said that because of the experience of a district leadership team as a network who helped her collaborate, who helped her problem solve in a different way, and also communicate to the public how she was going to be forward facing, communicate those decisions promptly, quickly, accurately. That communication with the public then built trust. She was able to be seen as someone in the public eye that was different. And since now, and fast forward, just the communication style and effort, it built a whole nother level of trust with the community. So the long and short story there is that, it's a whole nother level of communication and trust that she had developed with her team, and
Right.
then since with the community. So super
Thank you for
important
that.
takeaway.
And Robert, I would also add that it's important to remember that we didn't have months, weeks, or in some cases even days to prepare for this. So,
Right.
some of us, given where we were in the country, had a little bit of a heads up. But when I say little bit, I mean like 5-6 days to prepare to send students home for an unknown period of time. But I can tell you that there were, because districts in the state of Washington, where I am and was at the time, different districts closed at different times. And there were districts in parts of the state that learned they were closing by hearing about it on the news, like literally. So when you talk about sort of decisions you had to make in the moment and the scrambling that happened in those early days, it was constant scrambling.
Thank you for that. You mentioned in the book that some leaders thrived while others struggled. What were some of the key leadership traits that helped superintendents navigate the crisis effectively based on your research?
Yeah, I mean, one that comes to mind for me, and Susan, we can tag team this. Districts that, let's say, this could just because of a funding issue, were savvy enough, had leadership, had dollars. We could think of all the reasons why, but had transitioned, for example, to one-to-one devices. Google Classroom, for example, had the capacity to pre-COVID get their district set up for device deployment, for example. They certainly were in a different position than districts that didn't, right? So to Susan's point, and she made me think of this, contrast that with a district that had to scramble and try to get their district ready for a one-to-one device setup or an LMS system quickly. I just, for a lot of different reasons, would think and did think that the district that wasn't as prepared for a lot of different reasons, they struggled, quite differently than the district that had. So that's one reason that I can think of for sure. I don't know, Susan, what's another one that you can think of?
I think some of the traits of leaders that I think we really had to tap into in that moment was being decisive and adaptable at the same time. Being firm, but being empathetic at the same time, being courageous and vulnerable at the same time. So I think that really it was leading from a place of constant duality, which is, it was just
Hard.
sort of balancing all of those things. But I think at the core of it all, Robert, was what I think made the difference, I know for me personally, was really tapping into the values that have always driven me, not just as a leader, but as a human being, and leading from a place of values and making those values known to your community, because there were plenty of times where people disagreed with what we were doing and why we were doing it.
Right.
But if they know why you're doing it, if they
Mhm.
understand where it's coming from,
Yeah.
I think they can stomach it in some cases a little bit
Yeah,
easier.
I think that's very true.
Well said. One of the biggest revelations of the pandemic was the digital divide and equity gaps. What systemic changes do you think are needed to ensure we don't fall back into the old patterns? And Dr. Steve Jordan's U of T professor who co-chaired our summit this past fall coined the phrase during the pandemic, the great snapback. He said, we're facing the threat of all this innovation that took place of going backwards. And we saw that happen in some regions, and teachers made great strides. There was great mass innovation. Did you experience some of that based on your interviews with the
Yeah,
40?
I would
Mhm.
say it's not a matter of when we revert back to allowing the digital divide to prevail. It's happened. It is happening. For all of the talk about recognizing that universal broadband access was really a necessity, it should be treated as a utility, if it will. And
Right.
for all of the efforts that many of us made
Great analogy.
during the pandemic to elevate that need and pressure those in positions to address it to do so, we have gone backwards. There's still far too many people, and I'm not even talking just children and young people in rural areas where
Right.
we know that there are places in Alaska and other states of the country where getting internet access will be
Right.
a perennial challenge, hopefully not forever, but for a while. But I would argue that there are likely even students in my own community here outside Seattle that
Right.
For sure.
no longer have the home access that they did during the
Right.
pandemic.
I've seen
Right.
more innovation. I've seen greater innovation happen in more rural areas because of necessity than in
Right.
some urban areas and pockets of urban centers that
Correct.
don't have access to tools or
Very true.
internet, So,
Very true.
Kristi, did you want to add further to
No,
that?
I think there was a realistic expectation that because we did have to make such quick changes, whether it be to the teaching and learning space itself, and we were able to do it, that we had an expectation that those changes would be everlasting. And then there were a lot of other factors, whether you want to classify them as political or whatever, but they weren't directly related to teaching and learning, that negated the advocacy efforts that needed to continue. So unfortunately, I guess the good thing is that the K-12 system that is so difficult to change was able to change. The bad thing
Right.
is the K-12 system that is so difficult to change is not changing as rapidly as we would like to see.
Hence that great snapback that occurred. In our lifetime, I never imagined 100% of educators would use some form of tech-infused pedagogy in their day. They were because of necessity. And that was remarkable to me.
I
A
think
quick
the
story. Oh, go ahead, Susan. I'll
No,
tell you
go
a
ahead.
quick story. Well, a quick story though, and it's the Pollyanna in me. But I think Susan was she was with me. We were talking to a group of educators, superintendents, and here's the thing though, the silver lining in all of this is that there is ability for teachers to utilize digital platforms and the teaching and learning innovation that's different than what we ever thought could happen. And Superintendent California, unfortunately, the fires impacted his district traumatically. And he shared with us that because of what they experienced during COVID, that school district was able to, I hate this word, pivot and, utilize a lot of different ways to deliver instruction. Now, it may not be perfect, but they
Right.
were, going back to what they did during COVID. And had we not gone through that experience, I truly don't think that, that would happen. And so that's just a small little silver lining that I like to point
Right.
out, saying that, that's a good thing that they're able to do it. They're able to manage it. We just need more of it, and we need advocacy
Right.
to help create.
Well said. Well said. And while it wasn't elegant necessarily, all the various systems that were being used on the fly,
Mhm.
it was crisis learning. And
Right.
I know there was a lot of criticism around that, but if it wasn't for the tech, there would have
Wouldn't
been pretty much zero learning, or you would have been shipping paper packages to
Yeah.
homes. And I know that happened in some cases, but we saw 70,000 Chromebooks and other devices shipped to homes in the Toronto District School Board, my alma mater, to enable one-to-one computing.
Right.
And that was a commitment that the district did, like many districts in the US, that gave them internet access built into the devices. Unfortunately, a lot of the districts took the technology back when they went back to school. So that great snapback, because then you get into sustainability challenges.
Right. Therein lies this advocacy effort that still needs to take place. So.
Right. Now, ESSER funding was massive. And
Yes.
and there's still some remnants of ESSER funding. That acronym was, used over and over, and it made an impact. And then there was a cliff.
Correct.
Right. And that's where I think partnerships need to kick in, and creative solutions. And to your point, courageous leadership to transform and keep pushing that digital transformation that is upon us, that isn't going to stop. And then throw AI into the equation.
I think the biggest takeaway with ESSER funding, and it's woven throughout the chapter, is how complex school funding is. Kent Scribner, who was a former superintendent for Fort Worth, he said, and most all of the superintendents, Susan, I don't want to speak for you, but I think you would agree with this, is there's two big challenges with ESSER, and Robert, you alluded to it. It was one-time dollars, which we were grateful to have to help with the immediate impact of COVID. But the other challenge, and it's sort of twofold, is that we were under a tremendous pressure to communicate to our stakeholders what we were doing with the dollars quickly, so that we wouldn't get criticized for not spending them how they saw fit. And secondly, most people in school finance, or at least who pay attention, know that sustainable dollars, 80% of your budget is staffing. And so again, we're going to come back full circle to advocacy efforts, the digital divide and sustainability. ESSER dollars, we would obviously be thankful for the dollars there for the first part of COVID, but to continue it, it's a complicated issue where we needed to have more dollars to sustain the efforts. So very complex issue.
Susan, final thoughts on that point?
Yeah, so I think that to build on Kristi's point that, school funding is far from intuitive, and it's a challenge to help our communities and the general public understand how funding works, and that dollars come in different colors and can only be used for certain things. And I think there were some very unrealistic expectations of what we could do with those ESSER dollars. There was, and understandably so, an expectation that not the first wave of ESSER funding, which was really just about survival, PPE and HVAC systems and all of that, but the later rounds of ESSER funding that were around, really teaching and learning improvements, that, it's hard to innovate when you're just trying to survive. And it was not a moment or a culture or a moment in time where innovation was easy
Right.
to embrace and to try new things, because frankly, we were just trying to make sure that our students, families, and staff had the very
That's right.
basics. And
Right.
that's not to excuse us from not using this moment. And I want to be clear, there are superintendents, some in this book and many others around the country, who showed tremendous innovation and creativity in how they use the dollars. But I
Right.
think that overall, there was an unrealistic expectation on the part of the general public of just how much innovation we could really
Right.
Correct.
do with those
Well,
dollars during that time.
Right.
Well said.
Right.
As we're approaching the end of our podcast, superintendents reflecting on the future. The book includes insights from multiple superintendents. You alluded to some 40. What are some of the key lessons they shared, and how can we improve public education moving forward based on some of these lessons learned? That's a big one to unpack, but I think I sense a series coming up out of this.
Yeah,
Perhaps.
I think the overall takeaway, and Kristi alluded to this at the very beginning of the interview, Robert, which is that we were hoping too that this book would help humanize superintendents and the superintendency, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about not just what superintendents do, but who they are. And so our hope too is that part of what this book does is to help humanize superintendents, help people understand the work that they do, and ideally, galvanize more support for the work of superintendents and help the public understand that they play a key role in supporting the superintendent in their local district. And one of the key ways they do that is through school board elections. And so I think those are the kinds of conversations that need to be happening now more than ever.
Thank you for that.
I love what Susan says, and I just would, I would just add. Sometimes she'll say, next time you see a superintendent, hug them. I think humanizing the role is really important. We talk to superintendents all over the country, and I'll tell you one quick story about one of them that I love the story. Martha Zamora says from Texas. She says, what I learned through the pandemic was the fact that I am so much more than just a name and 3 degrees behind, or 3 letters, whatever, behind my name. And as hard as it was as a superintendent during COVID, that I had to be forward facing, and throughout the pandemic, I was always out in the community. But I think, to Susan's point, the more the community knows who we are as people, the more that they will be able to relate to us and support us. So, I loved being a superintendent. I know Susan loved being a superintendent, but it also didn't, it wasn't our entire life, right? And so we try to talk to superintendents about, listen, it's a great job, but it doesn't have to be who you are. So I think that was another part of why we wrote the book. It's just to help garner support for the superintendents and those who are thinking about going into the role for their profession.
Well, thank you for that, Kristi. You both of you are so inspiring, and such courage was needed to pursue this project. Talk to me about advice for future leaders, final thoughts for aspiring education leaders, because there is a vacuum right now, it seems, and tremendous amount of change. I'm a baby boomer, and there's a lot of movement and a lot of talk about retirements. I'm not ready to sail into the sunset, although I do sail. And you are very much active in providing leadership and professional learning. Thoughts?
Yeah, my best advice to people who are considering the role of superintendent is to talk to people who have been superintendents. Talk to them about your hesitation, your what you're thinking, because we've all been there. Find trusted advisors. Make sure that you make time to have you want to call it a board of advisors or whatever, because they're advising and they're putting time into your health, wellness, whatever you want to call it. But people like Susan and I care deeply about the future of public education. And we want to make sure that there are superintendents who have the skills and the dispositions and the the desire to lead our public schools. So, if there's somebody out there that's like not sure, but maybe, reach out. We are here to talk you through whatever questions you have. And, we just want to make sure that, you know what you're stepping into, and we're here to support you.
Great advice, Susan.
I would just put a check mark next to that.
Ditto. Well, with that, Dr. Enfield and Dr. Wilson, thank you for sharing your wisdom and experiences and your passion. Your book is a must read for any education leader or aspiring one navigating these complex times. Where can the audience find more about the book and yourselves, perhaps?
Yeah, so the book is available now on Amazon. I know there's been some conflicting information about that, saying it wasn't available until March 1st, but it is available, and you can get it right on Amazon. I think you can also get it on our publisher's website, but it's available on Amazon. So there's a link there that we can get over to you, Robert. That's the easiest way to get it, I think. Susan, is it anything else you want to add on that?
Nope.
With that,
we will also be at AASA.
Of course.
And we'll be there, and it'll be available at the bookstore there if you want to drop by and see Susan and I. Just a little shameless plug there.
Well, fantastic. I just had an opportunity to interview Gustavo Besteros yesterday, and that was awesome and inspiring as well. That's a wrap for this insightful episode of MindShareTV. My name is Robert Mardolacci. Be sure to check out www.MindShareLearning to get your latest issue of the MindShare Learning Report. And until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and keep the learning curve steep.